Okay, hopefully this is now working and we are live. Welcome everybody. Good evening. Tonight I'm talking to Christopher Ruocchio and we're going to be talking about Sun Eater. So if you have any questions, please post them in the chat, but please no spoiler questions because there'll be some people who haven't read the series and we don't want them to spoil it for them. So we're going to keep the questions fairly general. We're going to talk about, I do have some questions that people have sent in through social media to Broken Binding. So I'm going to ask some of them, and then we've got some kind of writing questions, some general ones at the end, and obviously any questions that come in that I pull up, we can talk about tonight as well. So just to kind of kick us off, we had a few ones that you looked at on Instagram. Actually, were saying that where did the name Hadrian Marlowe come from, and also the origin of the Royce shields, which was quite interesting when you were talking about it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on. This is great. I'm glad to be here. As far as the name goes, sort of each part of the name has like its own sort of story. Hadrian is named after the Roman emperor, obviously, but he's named after the Roman emperor because I really enjoyed Gormenghast as a kid, Mervyn Peake's books, and his main character is Titus, so I thought I would pick a different Roman emperor and also give him purple eyes, as sort of a nod to those books. There's a bit of a Gormenghast homage at the beginning of the series, and I really wanted the first book in particular to be a love letter to the books that got me where I am with the story and as a fan, right? And so that was sort of the impetus there, right? And then there's been sort of you make a decision like that, and then like things will sort of tick into place, right, accidentally in terms of meaning. And Hadrian was emperor really at the turning point for the empire, right? And after it's Hadrian who does the first sort of like step backs from territory. He releases Rome's hold on Mesopotamia and on Armenia, and the empire starts to contract and never recovers. And so we think of sort of that is Rome's zenith, right, under Trajan and Hadrian. But in a certain sense, the empire went through sort of a supergiant phase, where actually the fact that it's so big is a symptom of decay, and not the opposite. You see this with all sorts of civilizations, and from that you may divine some meaning about theme and intention with the story. But that was sort of a happy accident, proceeding from the much sillier choice to just make it a sort of wink in the direction of Mervyn Peake. And the last name is even sillier, and was for less reason. Marlowe is, of course, the family sort of fancies itself descended from Christopher Marlowe, which is impossible because he had no children and was probably homosexual. But he has the distinction of writing Faust, right, and Tamerlane the Great, which are both excellent, a bunch of other excellent plays. But he also has the real distinction of being the only noteworthy Christopher that I could think of in sort of the English canon of literature. And so it was also a joke about my name. And so that was sort of the thought process. These are obviously like very silly reasons, right? But
why not? Why not?
But then all the sort of Faustian, Mephistophelian symbolism spun out of that choice too, right? So you make choices sometimes for goofy reasons, and then you figure out why you made the choice later, right? And you happen into things like this. And as far as the Royce shields, right? Because this question I think came because. Is it Michael Sullivan has a Hadrian?
Yes, Michael J. Sullivan.
Yeah, which I did not know. I've never read Mr. Sullivan's work. But the Royce shields are named after my friend Cayman Royce, who was one of my college friends who went on to get a physics PhD. And I thought it would be a nice nod to my friend, right, if he made some sort of discovery in the future. And so I named the shields after him.
Yeah, that's a nice nod. Yeah, sneaking things in like that. I think I really enjoy. I found a couple before and I messaged you and like, is this what I think it is? And you're like, maybe it was. So
yeah, and I should add somewhat amusingly that my friend Cayman is named after Picard's character in that episode of TNG when he lives a whole life in a simulation.
Oh my!
So there's sort of a meta thing, right, where like he has now also become a science fiction cameo. So I thought that was very fun.
Generation, The Inner Light.
That's the one. Yeah. I couldn't remember the title.
Wow.
So his mother named him after that episode, which I think
that's
really
pretty
cool.
Special.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. I like him a lot. Cayman, if you see this, You're cool.
Yeah,
No, been
that's
a while.
awesome. So another question we had was, without being too spoily, was there any particular inspiration for Volker?
Not that I can recall specifically, in terms of like another character or whatever. There's an aesthetic, obviously. She's got a bit of a goth thing going on. But I know some people think there's a character in the Star Wars comics that's rather similar, but I think actually I predate that character slightly. I can't remember the name. It's in the new comics, or at least I was already writing the character by the time that came out, and I didn't read the new Star Wars comics either. So
yeah, is it Dr. Phasma? Is that the one?
something like
Maybe
that.
something like
Know.
that.
I don't know.
Hmm.
I didn't read the new comics.
I haven't. No, I've heard of them
outside of a couple issues, I think maybe. But anyway, but yeah, no, I don't have a particular. There's not always a place you start, right? You just like you have a character that you want to sort of fill a spot, and then they sort of grow that spot for no particular reason, right? I don't know. I don't have a good answer there.
That's fair enough. Fair enough. So I'm being careful with this one.
Yeah,
Someone said,
sorry to the questioner.
No, it's fine, because we don't want to spoil things for those who are just kind of reading 1, 2, and 3 now that the specials are out with the broken binding. So someone's saying, will we ever find out what happened to Switch when he and Hadrian go their separate ways?
Well, maybe. Maybe. I don't want to answer that one in case there's an answer soon. Book 7's out in November. But there were also, I mean, that's one of those questions. There are a few sort of in this vein. When will Hadrian see his parents again, right? The answer to some of those questions, maybe never, right? Because life is like that sometimes, right? And I had this sense in writing the books that, in drama, right, it's a lot more common for every T to be crossed and every I dotted, right? And life is not like that. There are all sorts of unresolved plot lines in all of our lives, right? And leaving a few of those, if they're not centrally important to the plot of the books, I think is, well, let's say a choice, right? Like it's maybe it's better that way because life is like that, and there's something artistically meaningful about that choice too. In the same way that like addressing those things, right, would be meaningful. It's sometimes things are just broken, and sometimes things don't go back the way they were or the way that you'd like them to be, right? Like I have friends who just disappear, right? I haven't heard from in years, and I still don't understand what happened, So some of those things, I'm not saying this is necessarily true of Switch or of Hadrian's family or whatever, right? There are all sorts of questions people ask, right? The answer will just be no, So.
Yeah. Sometimes stories, as you say, it's a choice for them not to be satisfying in every single facet. So there's a good question about setting here. Someone said, was there a particular inspiration for Vergossus?
Carcosa from there's a little bit of sort of the vibe from Robert Chambers, King Yellow, which is like quite a different sort of book, right? But the sort of feelings I had about that and about certain Lovecraft stories, but also about certain cyberpunk stories at the same time, because it's sort of both of those things, right? Sort of gave me a set of feelings that I had in working on the setting. There's perhaps a little bit of the House Absolute from Book of the New Sun in it as well, in that they're both these subterranean complexes, and there's there's a bit of Stargate Command in it as well, actually. And funnily enough, in its let's say in the deep lore, and there's a lot of I was very deep in Ghost in the Shell on book 2 when I was going to the well, but you sort of put those things together. And the other thing too is I really like the contrast between sort of these industrial settings and like Baroque furniture. You see a lot of like these converted like warehouses and mills and factories downtown that have become expensive apartments because the nature of urban space has changed. And I have a friend who lives in a mill, a converted mill in Boston, right? Like the place he lives is like a converted like national monument because it was this old, important building, right? But they still want to use it, so he can't change anything, right? The windows are, I mean, that's way more common on your side of the ocean than mine, but not a lot of that in America. And it was very just struck sort of by that, right? And by these sort of very Spartan, you sort of exposed old metalwork and stuff, but then like you've got like the fancy leather couch and stuff like that. Sort of contrast was very important in sort of setting up the general aesthetic and feel of Vorgosos in particular.
Yeah, we have a lot of kind of listed buildings over here that like externally you can't touch them, you can't do a lot with them. They're sort of historically preserved, and that's just regular places, not even castles and anything. It's just things you have to leave alone. So you have finished the first draft of book 7. It's coming out in November, as we said. Have you even thought about like what next, like a short story or a novella? Are there other Tales of the Sun Eater lined up that you're wanting to do next?
Yeah, there was more. So Sun Eater's not done. The universe isn't done. It'll take a bit of a backseat for a little while. I still I have obliged myself to write short stories for not the Broken Binding editions, but the other 2 special editions we have in the works with Andorita Books and with myself, with my friend Steve Diamond. So I've got new stories for those, and the Broken Binding editions also have these. They have these intros in them. All 3 special editions do that. Rather than do the thing that is normal, where we write an intro and it's like, this book was very good. I had a good time writing this book, and it is good. That every special edition has some sort of intro, right? Or you get another writer in to say, this book is good, I like it, and I am not the guy who wrote it, right? And,
yeah, nice.
And I find that that's like mostly like a waste of paper, right? Most people don't care about those, right? Very occasionally, right? If a writer that you care about is writing about another writer that you care about, you want to read that one, but like that's really it, right? So most of those intros become dead space. So the intros in the special editions are all actually sort of short stories in that they are documents from the universe, sort of talking around the plot, right? Because the books are also documents from the universe, right? They're all first person. And so having the intros stand sort of like the epigrams in Dune, right, as context to the document that you're reading that is the books was sort of a fun idea. So I've been writing sort of antagonistic documents, like maybe a military report from a supporting character at the time who doesn't like the main character or something like that, right? So I've got to do those. There will be more Sun Eater books, Sun Eater universe books. Hadrian will ride off into the sunset, let's say, into the supernova, as it were. But there'll be more stuff in the universe. But then as far as what the next books are, I have been asked not to talk about them. Daw has told me to keep my mouth shut. But I will. I'll be working on another thing. You'll probably hear about it reasonably soon. Probably not before book 7, but maybe. That depends on when they want to make the purchase announcement. You know how it is, right? Publishing there. For those who don't know, like there's there's this thing called Publishers Marketplace, right, where the publishers will there'll be like a 1 or 2 sentence thing where they'll say, and this editor has acquired this book by this author, in a X number of books deal for blah 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 blah, right? And it's just sort of a little, I think it's so the editors can keep track of their achievement score, like it's Xbox Live. But eventually that'll get posted, and probably a little bit will be said about it then. But I also have, I should say, this sort of sword and sorcery kind of science fantasy thing I've been working on. There's 3 stories now. The third one actually comes out next month. The first one's called The Barrow King. It's in Galaxy Magazine on galaxysf.com. You can read it for free. Second one comes out in an anthology that, Stephen, you were also in, called Swords and Larceny, which is coming out in the fall. I don't think Bane has picked we were just talking about this. Bane doesn't have a release date yet. It'll probably be like October-ish would be my guess, plus or minus a month. But I have another story in there. It's called The Shrine of Lost Stars. And then the third one is called The Pilgrim Road, and that'll be on my Patreon next month. But you don't have to join the Patreon to get the story. Patreon lets you just buy posts now. So it'll be up there for
Oh,
a couple
cool.
bucks if people want to read it. It's super fun. I've been really enjoying those stories. So if anyone wants to check that out, it'll be up on the 10th. So.
I remember you saying that if you start to get a story that is tickling the back of your brain, rather than invent something whole cloth, if it can fit in the Sunny to universe, you're like, well, why would I start all over again and just put it in there and it's off to one side, or it's in the past, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, that's usually so. I used to, when I was working at Bain, I got invited to a lot more anthologies than lately. Just because I was also, it was like one of the things I did for my job was I helped put together short story collections, because most of Bain's short story collections, anthologies, were done in-house for financial reasons. Usually what happens is an editor will pitch a short story collection idea to a publisher, and then they will pay that editor like an author, and it's incumbent on the editor then to act as the bank for the authors in that collection. It's a lot easier to just pay one of your staff to do it and then handle all the payment processing internally, it turns out, because then you also don't have to pay your editor to make the book because it's on salary. So I did a lot of those, and when I did those, they were like, you can also write a story for them, and that was a good deal. But I'd have like a prompt for that. So they'd be like, we're doing legal stories. So I'd have to make a courtroom story. And then I was always trying to figure out how to make it a Sun Eater story in the vain hope that someone would read the collection and be like, I like this. Is there more of it? And there is. I think I've only spoken to like 3 people ever who like found my books that way, but it was, an excuse to write more stuff. And the thing about short stories is you can always, you can always resell them, right? To another venue later, and you can do that with books too. It's just the contracts are a little bit snarlier. So, So I've always, if I have a science fiction story, I'll fit it into Sun Eater if I can, and that will remain true. I see no reason to make the galaxy a second time. Far as I know, God only made the universe once, so but maybe, right? So doing it again seems daunting. I am.
Yeah, if you've got the table all laid, why would you go through all of the pain of having to start with a blank page when it can just sit off to one side somewhere?
Yeah, I think too the danger for me is that it would be very easy to sort of do the same thing again and sort of accidentally sort of move in the same direction. I'm a big Dark Souls fan, but I do often wonder like when they're gonna make a new game, right? Because like Bloodborne is different, right? Sekiro is different, but Demon Souls and Dark Souls and Elden Ring are to a certain extent telling the exact same story. Particularly Dark Souls and Elden Ring are telling the same story, just with a slight in terms of theme, right? And I'm like, well, you could make a new one. You could tell a story that's not about the sort of entropy and the collapse of the universe, and in which maintaining civilization is actually a gloss for the dark ending, actually. Right. We could do something else, right? And I think I would do the same thing where it'd be like, I promise this is not Sun Eater again. It's Elden Ring. It's not Dark Souls. I don't know what you're talking about. And I love both of those things, for the record, to everybody, but but they are spiritually the same game.
Like there's a sudden huge glut of like zombie products, and people are like, oh, they're all just copying each other, and some of them are coming out just at the same time by coincidence, but then you get like a second wave and a third wave, and I'm like, it's just the same thing. Or by the 14th season of The Walking Dead, I tapped out seasons ago because it was the same churn, and I just got so bored, and I'm like, I can't. So things run their course, I think, really.
Yeah. And I think the tendency, if I'm just making up another galaxy, right, is like, well, I'll start using the brain circuits that like made up a galaxy, and it'll end up looking a lot like Sun Eater anyway. So I'm just kind of like, well, I should just do the same thing on purpose. Besides, I remember Jonathan Mayberry talking about how Stephen King said, if you can make your stories connect, you should, because the nerds like that, right? And they do, right? I do, right? Like I'm not a big Stephen King fan, but the thing that appeals to me most about his work is exactly that, right? Is that this story about a guy living in small town Maine somehow has something to do with, his like weirdest, most out there fantasy horror stuff, right? And it all fits together in some sort of articulated way, right? Like that's very cool, right? Like things that have no business fitting together superficially, right? That's awesome, right? And so more of that would be cool. So
yeah, well, he has, like the Dark Tower, which is his strange Western world jumping series, and yet you read some of his more sort of normal books, and then something happens, and after a while, people go, "Wait, isn't that connected from Hearts of Atlantis?" And that's connected to here, and in the back of your brain, it's like that map on the wall with all the pins. You start kind of drawing it and going, "Yeah, there's all this connective tissue that he doesn't really talk about, but it's there."
yeah, that's very satisfying, right? And so if I can do that, but on the sort of galactic timescale stuff like that, it's sort of a long-term interest of mine, right? But I'll also do stuff that just has nothing to do with that, right? So the sword and sorcery has nothing to do with it.
So is it rewarding for you then when you've put Easter eggs in and people get them in Sun Eater and they're like, "Is this something else?" Or like connected to something? You're like, maybe.
Sometimes, right? My favorites are when people are like, "What does this mean?" And it's like, actually, it's for a thing that I haven't done yet, right? Like that's funny. It's like, oh yeah, it's a good question. Interesting. So
Yeah, I've had a couple of those. I messaged you and I was like, have I worked out what they are later on? Yeah. I had some of those.
Yeah, I haven't written that book yet. Probably like not for a while. Yeah.
So we had a question saying, "Are you catching up in your sleep yet?"
Yes, yeah. Well, my wife will never catch up on her sleep. God bless her. She's one of those people who left her own devices would sleep permanently. She's just a big sleeper, that one. But yeah, no, we're doing pretty good. New baby is doing a good job. She'll make it like 6 hours some nights now, which is it's actually kind of early for that, so that's great. So we're making it 6 hours is about all I get anyway. So I feel back to normal. It's just not necessarily the 6 hours I want ideally for getting maximum work done. For that to happen, I like to get up at like 4, but that means I have to get to bed early, which the baby is not allowed. So her most active time period is between about 8 when the first baby goes to sleep and midnight. So this is like, pick a different time. Come on, child. I know you've been here almost 2 months. Get with the program, But no, we're doing great. Everyone's great. Everyone's healthy. Which is what really matters. So
that's good stuff. I had a couple of interesting process questions that people had sent in.
Yeah.
Someone said, "Did you ever consider writing the Sun Eater from a third-person POV, or is it always going to be first person?" Because the structure of the story, I suppose you could have, but was it always the intent to do first person?
No, I started out doing third person. I actually, for most of my life, I hated first person. It was like a weird sort of it was like a suspension of disbelief issue, right? Like I actually am not on a spaceship book. Like stop lying to me, right?
Stop saying that.
Because like you read the book in your head and you're like, this isn't true though. Like I am not this guy, right? It took me a long time to get over that because like I was just a weird kid, right? I hated talking animals too. I just couldn't abide most Disney films. They just like freaked me out. And so I had a really rough time with first person until it was really I can't remember if it was as I had read there's a YA series by DJ McHale, Pendragon, that is in first person a fair bit, and it's also got like the text is in universe as a document, right? And I think that started to highlight the appeal of the format to me, but it didn't really sort of crystallize until I read Anthem by Neil Stephenson, I think, which is in first person, and I just really, really dug that book. It's probably my favorite Neil Stephenson book, which I've read like maybe 4. So I'm not like a expert on Neil Stephenson's work, right? But I really dug Anthem. It's not a book I usually like recommend to people because it's pretty eggheaded. It's like a lot of it's like about Platonism and like sort of it's pretty out there, right? It's a lot of math nerd talk, which is like not even my thing, but like he's a great writer. And but I was here for the Platonic philosophy. That was fun. That's more my bag. But like I really enjoyed that book, and so I think that sort of changed my attitude. And so at some point in college, I got to the point where I'm like, I'm running out of time, which is not really true. But I wanted to I wanted to have an agent by the time I graduated. That was my goal, because I was trying to weasel out of having to have a job, which did
Right.
not quite work out. I missed that by about 7 years, but that's okay.
Mhm.
Um, but happened to the publishing job. And so one of the things I did was I had this sort of clean break where I'm like, look, everything that I've written as a kid before, like that is over, right? I am starting the project afresh, even though it is the same project, but I'm like changing a bunch of stuff, right? This is when Hadrian's name became Hadrian. And when that happened, I made the move to first person to like really cement that this is not the same thing.
Right.
And with that came a bunch of other sort of narrative choices, right? The loss of all these other characters, but that also like sort of focused the story in a different way, and kind of that crystallized a lot of the thematizing. And it's a lot easier for me to sort of figure out everything else if I know what the story is supposed to be about, right? Because you need to like start with something, right? Like it can be a
Mhm.
character, it can be a scene, it can be a plot idea, but it's probably best if you know what you're trying to say, at least in some vague way, right? And a book, of course, says like 100,000 things, right? People say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but those people haven't read books, right? They've read documents, and that's not the same thing. Uh, and so like if you have some sense of what you're trying to accomplish narratively, like then all of the other things recommend themselves. And
Mhm.
so um making that sort of choice to tell a memoir sort of led me toward questions about like an individual's impact on history, right? Because we had to look at an individual and stuff like that, right? And that led to like all sorts of other things, right? Because like making creative decisions is like running through a flowchart, right? Like one creative decision, which you can make arbitrarily, right? Like I was saying earlier with the names, right?
Yeah.
Suggests a bunch of other things as long as you're open to thinking about those things.
Yeah.
If it's just all arbitrary, like readers can tell, right? Because like the real world is a network of sort of causal relationships, right? And so you sort of simulate that by following the logic of any of the choices that you make in, setting up a world and making a plot. And this is one of the reasons I outline this, because if I just sort of tried to do this randomly, it would suck. Um,
I
and
can't. I
so,
can't. I have to plan. Yeah.
yeah, it's completely baffling to me that people can do it at all. And I won't say any mean thing about dancing right now. That's a different stream. I just don't. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't like it. It scares me. Even short stories, I'll plan. So.
It feels like so much wasted time and effort if you don't plan it to me. But that's that. I've tried it. The process didn't work for me. For those who it does work for, great. I just don't want to spend 6 months and then have to throw out
Yeah,
half
or a
of it and then
decade,
rebuild
or
it. You know.
yeah, yeah. I've heard of writers, running through whole manuscripts, and then it's sort of like it's like running an algorithm, and like the results don't converge, and they're just like, oh, and they throw the whole thing out, and I like life is too short for that, actually. Like I'm gonna die, you're gonna die, we're all gonna die. Why would you write that way? Uh,
Mhm.
so, um, but anyway, rant over.
That's okay.
Um,
So I guess with writing it first person, it does
yeah.
restrict you in some ways, but with Tales of the Sun Age, you can then do stories in other parts that he may never see, he may never have, we only get in passing, and you can, I guess, you explore the facets through the short stories.
Yeah, well, like any choices you make narratively, right? You like choose to not do other things. This is true in life too, right? Like you choose to be, a policeman, right? You're not going to be a race car driver, right? Or
Yep.
maybe, right? But like, if you choose to write in first person, that closes a bunch of doors, but it opens up a bunch of other ones. And even the closed doors, right, are useful, right? Because then you have to problem solve around them, and that's really where the creativity comes from. Creativity, right, does not come from unrestrained chaos. It comes from sort of focused, directed energy. And if you close a bunch of doors, then the blast has to go through whatever is open, right? You know and so by sort of shutting down a bunch of the other povs, I have to think about like, what do giant battle sequences look like, right? And actually, like, that
Mm.
frees me from having to do a lot of the grand strategy stuff, and I can just follow one guy through the trenches.
Yeah.
And turns out 1917 is a really good movie, so maybe that's not so bad. But you do lose stuff at the same time, right? You lose the sort of latitude, and if people don't like Hadrian, then they don't like the books, and that's a gamble you have to be willing to take. And you'd be gambling anyway if you had 35 characters and people only liked 7 of them. That's actually worse. Like, oh no, not another Cersei chapter.
I've heard people, not that character, but I've heard people say, I've say 4 POVs, I like 3 of them. It's always this character. I have to get through that character to get to the ones you like. And it's like, I can understand it, but it's frustrating when you put so much time into any character.
Yeah, and I love Song of Ice and Fire, but book 4 is a slog for me because Cersei has more chapters in that than anybody else. They're just all, it's just so not fun for me to read those chapters. And then maybe it's not supposed to be, right? I'm not saying he's doing, that's bad writing. I just can't abide it. She's just so awful. Anyway.
So we had a question from Joe Mack saying, why when editor at Bain did you envisage yourself being on the other side of things, and especially at this level of success?
Well, so the second part first, right? The only level of success that I ever envisioned was being able to do this like for a job. That's all I ever wanted. So if things get further, right, and I build a bigger house or something, right? Like that's lovely, right? But like all I ever really wanted was to do this for a living, and I get to do that, right? So in a certain sense, professionally, like I've already achieved my goals, and everything else is sort of extra, and that's really a strange sort of thought, right? Like I have my dream job, and I just have to keep it, and that's a different problem. I don't know if it's easier or harder, but it's a different problem. I don't know, and it's also very abstract, right? Because like so much of the impression of success comes from the internet, right? And if I go to the grocery store, right, nobody knows who I am. It's not like or anything, right? So and then I log out, and my daughter will have spat up on something, and the other one's trying to climb my leg, and they don't, it's very humbling, right? Being a parent, or just being a normal person, right? And getting cut off in traffic, or whatever, right? But as far as the first part, I actually sold my books to Bain, to Daw, the same week I was hired as a full-time employee at Bain, back in, that was 2016, January. And I can't remember which was first that week. It was kind of a blur. And so I was like always 2 guys. There was always like editor me and author me. And that was sort of a weird position to be in. Bain, my employer, was always very cool about it. It wasn't really relevant to DAW so much, what my day job was. So it was never really like, well, one day I'll be on the other side of this desk, right? It was like always on both sides of the desk at the same time.
Yeah.
And that was nice because you like learn what you don't like in editors, right, and in publishing, and but you also learn what you don't like in authors at the same time, right? And so I sort of learned, I hope, how to be a better employee, right, on both sides of that division simultaneously, because like you figure out what people do in publishing that bothers you as a writer, and what authors do to publishers that's annoying. You just don't do those things. Because like neither party there is innocent, right? And that's not to say I've always comported myself perfectly, but I have a lot more mercy, I think, for publishing than a lot of writers do, and a lot more mercy, I think, for authors than people in publishing sometimes have. So it was sort of a weird position to be in, but it was never like I was like smashed against the glass, like looking at Joe Abercrombie and being like, one day I'll be over there. It never happened. But
I think as an author, we have a lot of benefits compared to anybody that's kind of, we're not in the public eye, but you know what I mean? Like I remember Joe Abercrombie said this at a talk. Someone said to me, how is it just, going out in public and this, that, and the other? And he said, nobody knows who we are. Nobody cares. Unless you're in the fantasy and sci-fi bubble and you read that stuff, nobody knows. Like he went to a dinner party and someone sort of said to him, what do you do for a living? And he's like, oh, well, I write books. And then they're like, have you written anything I might have read? And this is, Joe Abercrombie, best-selling author internationally, 14 languages or whatever it is. And he's like, Yeah, a few books, but
Maybe, right? Yeah, it's always that's always that's a very uncomfortable conversation, right? You're like at somebody's wedding or something, and people are expecting like, oh, I'm an accountant or whatever, right? And then suddenly, like, the conversation for the next 15 minutes is not about the people getting married, and it's like, because I literally I was at one of my wife's friends' weddings, and her husband, it turned out, was a gigantic Brandon Sanderson fan, and he didn't know that this was my job, I think. And so like suddenly he was like sitting at the table with like his groomsmen who were all like book people, and they were just talking to me for like, dude, this is your wedding, you need to leave, right? Like, stop asking me questions
things to
about
do.
yeah
You're really
yeah
important things to do.
not the time, right? We can hang out later, go. And so like that is a little bit strange, right? Or like I had a guy in to fix the air conditioning a week ago, and he's looking at all the like very silly, if you don't know what's going on, science fiction pictures on my walls. He's like, what do you do? Like, what is all this about? And I'm like, let me explain. And then I have to explain, usually to get through to people in that position, that like I wrote a Thor comic one time that nobody read, but like that's the thing that people are like, oh, you're not just a crazy person who like, this is really your job. Yeah. So that's always a bit strange. But yeah, like it's funny. My brother works at a Home Depot, which is like a home repair for people who live in America. Yeah. I don't know if it goes international or not. And he handed his business card to a contractor. He's like, wait, like Christopher? And I'm like, this never happens to me, right? Like, why is it always my relatives, right? I was in a grocery store and some lady was like, hang on, are you? And I thought it was going to happen. But then she's like, did you work at Casa Carbone downtown? And I was like, yeah, like 10 years ago. She's like, it hasn't been that long. But it wasn't for the books, right? It was for waiting tables in college.
The strangest one I had was I was in a room somewhere in a pub talking to a friend, and a guy tapped me on the shoulder, and I was like, yeah. And he said, are you Stephen? I'm like, uh-huh. And he goes, oh, because I used to do a podcast for years. He recognized the sound of my voice. He was like, I usually listen to you every day on the way to work for years. And so he recognized my voice. Nothing else about the books. It was just that I happened to do a podcast. I was like,
that's pretty awesome. That's really cool. That happens. Like, obviously, the place that happens now is like at conventions, right? Because it used to be I could just go to a convention and like nobody would know. But I went to Dragonsteel in December, and like I couldn't get into the bathroom reliably because people would stop me.
Oh, wow.
And just to like say, like, just like one person, right? It wasn't like a crowd or anything. Yeah. We're like, oh my gosh, Christopher. It's funny. I saw. I don't think no, it's not the first time I ran into Daniel Green there, but I was going to the bathroom, and then Daniel Green was going to the bathroom. He's like, we should talk another time, right? Not this now. I was like, yeah, not the place, right?
So we've had some good kind of general questions in. I'll get to them. Someone's saying it kind of ties into what we're saying, but so do you have any writing advice for those who are aspiring authors that want to do this for some reason?
Yeah. Well, so I asked George Martin that question when I was like 10 years ago now, so I wasn't published yet, and he said sort of a zeroth consideration, right? Which is like, could you reasonably do anything else, right? And I told him no, and he was like, that's basically the right answer, right? Like, if you feel like you have to do this, then do it, right? Otherwise, the odds of things working out are pretty low, right? So, haha, George, I made it, but at least I made it for now, right? Like, things can always go away, right? I'm trying to, remind myself of that. I got the skull somewhere in here reminding me that I'm going to die. But like, that's sort of the first thing, right? Is like, if you really want this to be like a career, right? You need to know that that's a tough road, right? And if you could reasonably go, do another thing, right, then do that first, right? So sort of take that as a zero thing. But if you really want to do it, right, awesome, right? I'm not trying to be negative about that. I just, bear that in mind, right? Like, it can be unforgiving, right? But then treat it like a job, right? We have this sense, right, that like like art is a sort of pure magical process that just sort of happens by inspiration, right? The muse strikes or whatever, and there turns out the muses are not real. They don't exist, and so it really is a job, and so you need to like be disciplined about it in the same way that you need to be disciplined about like any skill that you want to learn, right? You need to practice it to some degree, maybe not every day, but close to every day, right? I always like hesitate to use this analogy because I clearly am not gym attending, right? But you need to treat it like going to the gym, right? You need to maybe you don't go every day, but the closer to every day you go, right? And assuming you practice correctly, you're not overtraining, right? The better, right? Because you develop all these good habits that sort of come from that. So the writing every day thing is maybe to a certain degree overstated, but it is generally good advice to write as frequently as you can. It doesn't have to be a lot, but I also like am a strong advocate for outlining, as we mentioned earlier. I think that most writer's block is, and this is like a stupid, Captain Obvious thing to say, right? But like, is simply the result of your like not imagining what the writing is about, right? There's nothing harder writing wise than staring into a blank word processor with no ideas, right? And so like get the ideas first and figure them out. You can outline to whatever degree you find useful, right? I probably over outline, but I think about my outlines as low resolution drafts, right? So it's easier to write a chapter if it's this long, right, than if it's 20 pages or whatever, right? If it's one page, that's easier. And so that way you can sort of get all of the ideas and the thinkery out of the way so that when you're actually writing, you can worry about character, and you can worry about theme, and you can worry too about prose, right? And we like almost never will you see a panel about actual writing at a science fiction convention. It's always about world building or genre or tropes, and it's like they're all things like you know what grimdark is. Do you really need a panel telling you what it is? Do you really? I guess it's maybe entertaining television, but like a lot of those panels I find professionally unuseful. So like, but you can focus on the writing, right? And that's really where you can become yourself, right? To a certain extent, like basically, right? Every story has already been told, right? Like that's just the case, right? And the thing that makes you great as a writer, or at least good, is your execution. And where that's going to come through is in your ability to manifest the ideas that you have, whether that idea is a character or a world or whatever, but in how you convey that. And that's the prose, right? And we sneer a lot at talking about like prose style, right? And it sounds like very nerdy and sort of like literary, and that's a 4-letter word for some people. But that's like the art, right? Writers talk about you don't want the prose to be distracting, right? You don't want people, but that's literally the medium that we're using, right? You need the language, right? Whether that's English or whatever you're writing in, is your tool. It's the only tool you have, right? Writing is a one input medium, right? It's not audio visual, right? You don't have a soundtrack, right? All you can, but like, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
You have one dimension, right, for conveying what you've got, and that is one channel. That's the words. That better be the best words that you can make. And that, developing your voice as a writer is a lot easier if you aren't simultaneously also trying to figure out what you're writing about. So outline for that reason, if for no other. And then the other thing too, these are like all sort of maybe common sense, right? But maybe this one isn't, right? Because like a lot of writers will say, what you need to do is read. Right, you need to read. I think that's mostly a scam on the part of writers to get you to buy their books. You need to have read. That's certainly true, but you need to like, if you find that you're reading more than you're writing and you're trying to write, you probably should write more and read less. As much as I want you all to read my books, right? Like if you want to write your own, reading can become, my friend Dave Butler's talks about writing flavored activities. And reading can feel like that. It's like, hey, I bought these books. They're research, right? They're research. I'm reading all these other fantasy novels for research, right? No, you're not. Like you've probably read 300 of them. You've done enough research on what a fantasy novel looks like. You can go write one now. You're reading them because you want to read them, and that's great, right? But if you want to write one, stop and go write it. I have friends who get on writers who may have taken a few years to put a book out, but they've actually been thinking about writing a book for 3 times as long. Actually, you're the same guy. It turns out, it's just nobody's read any of your books yet because you haven't written them yet, Anthony. But I see you. But I had my chance and I took it. It's a friend of mine. But anyway, I should have explained the joke. It's funnier if I didn't. Oh well.
He knows. He knows. Yeah.
Well, he will have felt it. The temperature around him just the eye of Sauron, where the eye of Sauron is one is me, is one very short Italian. So
resting on him. Yeah.
Yes.
I think for new writers, you should plan your first book. You really, really should. If you don't, you will go nowhere. You'll just spin in circles if you've never done it before. I think it just take far too long, and it's always discipline over motivation. There's no point trying to wait for the muse because it doesn't exist. So
yeah, I am not a pagan, and the other thing too is I did spin my wheels, right? Like Empire of Silence, I effectively was writing some form of since I was like 10, right? I was like, I'm going to write a book, and I didn't finish a book until I finished Empire of Silence. So that took a while. And then the funny thing about being a professional writer is then they expect book 2 in short order, right? They're like, hey, is next year good? And you're like, ooh, I don't know how to do that. It took my whole life to make this first one, so you have to develop the tools to do that. So if you want it to be your job, develop those tools in advance so you don't have to learn about them, on the job.
The biggest shock for debut authors is, yes, it took you 10 years to do that first novel. Great. Now you've got 9 months to write that second one so we can get it out in a year. Good luck. Off you go.
Yep, have fun. Right. And then there's the sort of the second punch from that, the 1-2 punch, right? Of like, also the shiny new author thing goes away, and everybody sort of treats you unless you happen to hit it on that first book, all of that support vanishes, and book 2 is like, did it come out? Does anybody know it's out? Right. Publishers don't push so hard on book 2, right? I always, when I have friends who like get into traditional publishing, right, they'll be like, I'm very excited, especially if it's like an indie writer crossing in, right? They're very excited. And then they get real anxious around book 2. They're like, where did all of the stuff go? What is my publisher doing? I'm like, well, they probably aren't, but
they're working on the new shiny thing,
Yeah, they found another debut author, actually. That's what happened. Hurts, doesn't it?
Getting published is really, really, really difficult. Staying published, I would argue, after 10 years is harder, I would say. So
yeah. I mean, it's a brutal industry, right? And the real saving grace of it, right? Now there are some like wonderful people in publishing, right? Like I said, I have a lot more. I have a lot more warm feelings about publishing, I think, than a lot of writers do. But the real saving grace of all of this, obviously, is readers, right? Because you can fail out of traditional publishing, but if you fail out of traditional publishing with a 1,000 readers, disappeared. There we go. But like, we can't do this without readers, right? That's basically what saved me, right, when things went all pear-shaped. So am I still lagging? It looked like I was lagging.
No, you're okay. You're back now.
Okay, cool. Okay, good.
So we had a couple of kind of connected questions. One was sort of saying, who are some of your favorite science fiction and fantasy authors? And then the connected one was, if you could meet any authors for dinner, alive or dead, who would you choose?
Alive or dead, Tolkien. I'm similarly grouchy. We might not get along at all, despite I think having a fair bit in common. But usually that's actually a recipe for not getting along. But Tolkien is and will always be my favorite fantasy science fiction writer. I love the two genres together here. Obviously, he didn't write science fiction, but you know what I mean. I would have loved to have met Gene Wolfe, who I admire very much. But other sort of favorite writers, I really love Gaia Gavriel Kay, which is a very cliche writer answer. He's my favorite living fantasy writer. is up there with Tim Powers for me. Tim Powers is genius, and I have had dinner with Tim Powers, and he's delightful.
Nice.
But I also really love Lois Bujold, who I have not had dinner with, but I have spoken to. She's great. What a genius. But some of my other favorites. I really liked Garth Nix a lot growing up. Like I love the Old Kingdom stuff. That was probably bigger for me than Harry Potter eventually. So by the time I'm like a weird, I was like, I know a lot of people have complicated feelings about Harry Potter for one reason or another, but like I just didn't like book 7. Like I read book 7 once and I was like, I'd never touched Harry Potter again. I just hated book 7 so much. So like I was like, okay, on to something else. And for me, that was like mostly Tolkien, but like I read a lot of Garth Nix, and I read a lot of T.A. Barron, like YA stuff growing up. And those were pretty influential on me. I'm excited to reread those with my girls. Not quite there yet. We're still reading Curious George books, but we're
One day
we're on our way up. But we'll get there with the Hobbits on the shelf. I really, like I mentioned Mervyn Peake earlier, Frank Herbert, obviously I'd be remiss not to mention Dune since everybody else does. But I like Zelazny a lot. I like C.L. Moore, Robert E. Howard. I read a lot of older stuff because in high school, I went to what we call a magnet school, which is a high school, but it had like a billion different elective classes, and you had a lot more latitude in picking your classes, a little bit more like a college, like university, excuse me. And so I took a science fiction literature course my first year in high school. So I was 14, and it was taught by an older guy. And so we read a bunch of the stuff that he was reading, right? And like the newest stuff that we read in that class was like Neuromancer. Right. So like almost everything was older. So I, in this like very formative period, I was reading, like Manvote and Sturgeon and Lee Brackett and again, C.L. Moore and all of these older writers. And so, I find that I, do better, having common ground with science fiction fans who are like in their 70s, than are my age. And so I'm in this weird position where it's hard for me, especially now because I really struggled to keep up with the field because I was working in publishing for so long that like I was only reading for work, and like you want to talk about a way to kill a habit, right? Like having to do the hobby for your job is a real good way to fall out of practice with it. And so and then also I find that like it's hard for me to read and write at the same time, which is why I gave the advice earlier that I gave. And so I have like a backlog. I've missed like the last 5, maybe 4 Guy Gavriel K books. So I've got to sneak those in at some point. Because I love his stuff so much, but I just haven't gotten to read them.
There's so many books coming out these days. My to read pile is horrendous, and just I can't. Even if I wanted to read 24 hours a day, I still couldn't keep up.
Yeah, it's not possible anymore. What's interesting is it like used to be, right? Talking to older fans, right? I have a friend, Ben, who used to be on the Hugo Award Commission and had been for decades. And, talking about the field as it used to be, right? Which is like, just as an aside, like there's probably like no group of people in human history who've been a worse custodian of their own oral history than science fiction fans. Like the entire history of the field is like trapped in the minds of people who are, on their way to catching a ride with Charon very soon. And so like there's all this stuff about like what these characters were like Asimov or Pohl that we just won't have. Asimov maybe, but like some of the other characters, like what was Damon Knight like? I don't know. Did we ask anybody? Did they write it down? No. And he was talking about how like it used to be actually possible to determine like really what the best novel of the year was because everybody read every novel that came out because the field was small enough. And now on the one hand, it's lovely that like there's so much, right? And you can only read the stuff that's like very specifically to your taste, right? It's like I'm a heavy metal fan, but I like all heavy metal fans only like some heavy metal music actually, right? And I can go broke listening to just new music in that specific flavor that I like. But at the same time, you like lose something when everybody isn't listening to the same music because nobody can really have a conversation about what they're listening to or what they're reading outside of a few major touchstones. But like even I have not read Wheel of Time, right? Like who has the time? I haven't read Malazan. So I have like major touchstones that I just like don't have with my own audience, right? So it's you do lose something, losing that sort of shared culture, and that is a loss, even if you gain something that's maybe more valuable.
We talked about this before, so I don't want to get into it again, but with the definition of genres becoming more and more specific, I think it loses some of that surprise when the field was smaller and it might just say speculative fiction book, and you pick it up and halfway through it turns on its head and you wouldn't have seen it coming and you don't know. Whereas now they would say, oh, on the back of the book, it gives you a little bit more. And you're thinking, oh, right. It's so the boxes that we read are such smaller and smaller things. I wish there were less books in some way, and they gave away less on the back of the book, so I could be surprised more and be like, okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah, I very strongly feel that we should probably stop describing our books at science fiction or fantasy and not go further. I think that having conversations about cyberpunk or gothic romance or whatever becomes so specific that what you do is you trap especially new writers into little boxes where they think the whole right to market phenomenon, right? You're ultimately working for an algorithm, and I understand practically speaking why someone would do that, right? Especially if you're not a name, right? You're trying to hit a target so that people will buy the book. But I think art suffers for that, right? I think it is better, like, I'll put it this way, right? Like, I've been watching Twin Peaks, right? And what the hell is Twin Peaks exactly, right? Like, it's a police procedural, but it is also a soap opera. It's just like, where do you put it, right? What do you do with someone like David Lynch, right? Where do you put it on a shelf, right? And the answer is by itself, actually, where all great works of art should be. And like, I get it from like a sales perspective, you need all this stuff and it's helpful, but creatively, it's the opposite. You trap yourself in this little box. It's like, I'm writing grimdark low fantasy, and it's like, okay, I've read that book already, actually. Can you write a different book? What about grimdark high fantasy? Read that one too. And I don't mean to pick on grimdark. It's just like it's so specific, right? A label that like it's very easy to generate a complete picture of like what that book is, right? Same with like cyberpunk, right? The word cyberpunk referred to like a group of actual people, right? Like the cyberpunks, right? And to write cyberpunk is to write after the fashion of those guys, right? And then as a genre, but that's also pretty egg-headed of me. So,
you mentioned Twin Peaks, and we had a question with someone saying, so when you're done with a day's writing, what are you watching? What are you listening to?
Very little. Well, okay, that's not true. The Magic School Bus, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. When the first child was very small, the Batman animated series, because she couldn't see the TV yet. Eyes take a minute to focus, but no, I watched the Super Mario Brothers movie again because my daughter likes Mario a lot at the moment, which is awesome. But like, that's really about it at the moment. I have not seen a film all year. I keep trying to see Nosferatu. It hasn't happened yet. So I'm like 3 months behind on that. I may this week because we're getting a night off for my birthday, so we might actually get to see a movie. But likewise, I haven't watched a television program since January, so all year, well, for myself, that is. Besides Twin Peaks, which I was only writing, thank you, Broken Binding, because I had a lot of signing to do. And so I actually have like 4 episodes of season 2 left, and that probably won't happen until I have more signing to do. So please pre-order the books. A link is probably in the description. So that I can do this for book 4 and 5. So I can finish Twin Peaks, please. Wyndham Earl is still out there. He's going to kill again.
Well, you've got the full series, then you've got Fire Walk With Me, and then I think you've got something else after that as well.
The Return,
so you've got quite a bit to get through.
I've still got probably about as far as it comes. I think the 3rd season is all like almost feature-length episodes. So, but they're pretty long, I think. But I'm looking forward to it. One of these days we'll get there.
So here's a very specific question from Pedro. Will revised text for Diamond editions be widely available?
I don't know, honestly. They will be, the revised text will be in the Underwriter Books edition.
Okay.
But it is very hard to convince big publishing to take their nice finalized print files on a book that they've already finished and redo them completely. So the only way I think that something like that would happen is if there were to be a new edition made and they would have to retypeset the pages.
Yeah.
And for that to happen, I think I would need to sell a lot more books than I already have. The fact that they've reprinted the hardcovers at all is a huge step in the right direction there. But probably another mountain to climb before I get them to do a new edition. And I don't think I'm quite in the Olympian sort of echelon of writers who merit a 10th anniversary edition just yet. I haven't hit the New York Times bestseller list, so I don't know. And I'm answering very glibly, and I apologize because I understand the frustration of readers on this front, because I went and edited book one because there were some continuity errors and stuff, and there are also sentences that I just thought man, what was I thinking at age 18? Writing this dumb sentence, and then I would fix them. It is pretty minor. If it's any consolation, the edits for the Diamond Edition are mostly continuity fixes and for style, and not content really. It's not like there's a secret chapter or something. I thought about doing that, but I didn't. I abstained. So maybe on book 3 I'll do that if I have time. But.
Okay. Well, the first 3 Broken Binding are out. It'll be 4 and 5 later this year. And I forgot to mention, but some of the artwork has started coming out in the last couple of weeks for 4 or 5. What do you think of it from that you've seen so far?
We actually finished. Renee sent the last end paper yesterday, and they are all done. And actually, Peng Lu went into book 6 a little bit, so we're a little bit further along on the cover boards and stuff, which is very fun. And it's been great. I really enjoy working with both of them. I work more closely with Renee than with Peng Lu, and that's been great. I think they're awesome. I will say the last end paper we finally did a space scene. Everything else has been sort of on the ground, and I kind of wish that we'd gotten some more spaceships out of Renee sooner, because he is so good at spaceships, man. I've been very resistant to doing spaceships for the book covers, because every science fiction book does a spaceship.
Yep.
And they kind of all look the same. With all due respect to those artists, right? It kind of if you're just walking through Barnes and Noble, right, Waterstones, right, and you're looking at the shelf and you see spaceship, how are you supposed to choose, right? And so I wanted to do something different with the covers, and I'm speaking specifically about the American ones, the Sam Weber, Kieran Yenner ones, because I didn't have any input on the UK covers really, and not much. And a lot more of a working relationship with the US covers, and I wanted to do the character thing to be different. And so I realized midway through working on the art for the special editions, sort of all 3 of them, that I had gotten so locked in that mode. I was so what other character could we see we haven't seen yet, right? That I forgot there were places and things that people want to see too. Turns out nouns are for more than just people. And so I so we sort of scaled up a little bit. We did both. There's I think some of the most sort of intimate character work pieces are on 4 and 5 so far, but also some of the biggest sort of spectacle pieces we've done in terms of scope and scale are also in 4 and 5. So I'm really excited about those. And now all I need to do is write those intros. So I have to finish book 7 so I can do those and get the Broken Binding edition squared away there. So
I love the piece of art with Hadrian training with the 3 different kind of set dummies. There's kind of the knight and a samurai warrior in the 3rd one, and they're all sort of surrounding him. That was fantastic. That
was really fun. There was one of those things I wanted to get into one of the special editions somewhere, and I was worried it was not an important enough scene, but I just thought it was so visually cool. So we couldn't figure out what to do for the first end paper, because Patrick really wanted something from early in the book, and I was like, wait a minute, I have my shot, and it's coming earlier than I thought. I thought I was gonna have to wait a long time, before we get it down to that scene. But Patrick he had a very particular sense of what part of the book he wanted things to be from. So we managed to squeeze it in, which is cool. And you'll notice that actually the knight he's fighting is actually Edward the Black Prince as his shield. So that was a nice touch from Renee there, which I thought was cool.
Amazing.
So
we had this question about, but so I know the answer is 4 and 5 will be this year, 6 and 7 will be next year. And given that book 7 only comes out in November, it's going to be quite a while into next year, I would think. So, yeah.
Yeah, it'll probably, my guess would be, so we're looking at like later this year, right, for 4 and 5, I think like fall-ish. Yeah. I'd imagine it'd be like the next fall, right? Would be my guess.
Yeah.
I could be wrong, but I think that's the plan.
Yeah, but if you're waiting for the Broken Binding specials of 6 and 7, I would like I would read the story anyway, and not wait that long for 6 and 7. The special hardbacks. But yeah, they'll be coming next year.
Yeah, they're on their way. Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, we keep having a few lags problems here, so I think we're going to wrap it up there. But okay. I think it's okay. We've had most questions have come in from people that there's some comments people can read later. I'm not going to post up. Some interesting ones you can look at later. But anyway, thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking about the books and the artwork. And for those who haven't read them, the first 3 Broken Binding hardback editions, second printing, is available now. There's still copies available. There's a link down below. So, and 4 and 5 will be later this year, and then, as we said, 6 and 7 next year. So keep an eye out for them. Follow them on social media. That's the best place on their website. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's good to see everybody, and thanks for reading.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you all later. Good night, everyone.
Bye.